Uri Caine, welcome to Lille Piano Festival.
Thank you.
We're delighted to have you here.
Happy to be here.
And this is a particular moment because you've just come out of your recital, or can we call it a recital? What would you call it?
Concert.
A concert,
whatever.
or a gig even.
A gig, even a gig. Actually, I have 3 gigs here, so it's the first of 3. And, just getting warmed up here, so it's good.
So the whole series is called Revisited.
Yes.
What does it mean to revisit a composer? Or are you revisiting the work or the composer or your own?
Well, a lot of the pieces that I'm playing are projects that I've done usually with larger groups. So I've made a CD of Mozart arrangements with a group, with a bigger group, with a smaller group, sometimes with some solo pieces. I've also done 3 CDs of Mahler's music, and I'm going to be doing some Goldberg variations and Wagner. So they're all basically performing piano solo versions of these projects. Although obviously when you're playing solo piano, it's a different thing than having a whole group behind you. So I've been practicing. I mean, I've never done the Stravinsky, and that was a lot of fun to prepare that.
Was it The Rite of Spring?
The Rite of Spring.
Yeah, and it's the anniversary year, so
Exactly.
is it for that occasion?
That's right. And as I was practicing on May 29th, which was the 100th anniversary to the day of the performance in Paris, in New York, they played a marathon of just Rite of Spring recordings, all types of recordings, old ones by Stokowski, new ones, arrangements, and it gave me a lot of ideas for how to play. So, I like to work on, when I say revisiting, I guess it's a way of looking at the music that the composers wrote and using it as a basis for improvisation.
And that's an interesting way to talk about it rather than classical crossover, which is another term that's been used to describe it.
Crossover to me is one of those words, especially in the United States. I mean, I come from the United States, where there's always sort of this overhang of the commercial. And it's a way that people think, okay, you're taking classical music, which is supposedly difficult, and simplifying it or making it more understandable for a general public. I'm
so
not really...
more fans, more clicks, more... It's a way to bring in more people.
Well, yes, but I mean, it's in the days, especially of the record companies, that would be the sort of idea of like, let's do this, but try it this way. And that was never really my approach. My approach was much more to use it the way a jazz musician uses standards or folk music, or taking some type of structure and then using that as the basis. And of course, there's a long tradition in jazz history of taking classical pieces and using them as a basis for an arrangement or improvisation.
Well, we could talk about your Gershwin CD, which has just come out.
That's right.
So Gershwin's Revisited again and again and again. How have you applied sort of your method or your style to Gershwin?
Well, I mean, the Gershwin project came about because I was invited to do it at a New Year's concert in Cologne, where they have, they invite people to do different things. And I basically arranged it for my ensemble. I did pieces like Rhapsody in Blue, but also using Theo Bleckmann and Barbara Walker, singers that I've worked with a lot. Sometimes the songs sound pretty straight or much more of jazz, but sometimes we put some twists into it.
They Can't Take That Away From Me, that one, the one I thought was most interesting. So, I mean, what would you call that? It was like a scat, or the CD skipping, or...
There's sort of a stuttering effect where, especially when we're playing live, it's something that we try to improvise together and then come down on a certain, and then the arrangement moves forward. So there's always improvisation, but then there's cues that lead the improvisation.
And really using the voice in that as an
Exactly.
instrument. Like, have you listened to Camille, the French singer Camille?
Sure.
That's what it really made me think of.
Yeah, I mean, I like that idea also, especially when you are working with something that's so well known, let's say, especially among a certain jazz element. Just to do something a little bit different, and maybe the singing style sounds grotesque or weird to some, but I mean, I enjoy that.
So you're using the existing knowledge, the existing awareness of these melodies and these lyrics from your audience and your listeners to surprise them or tease them, not quite getting to the...
Well, it's a good point that if you use really known material, that the audience can understand in a way what is happening within the improvisation and the arrangement. That's always the thing that you refer back to. That's like, okay, that's what they're trying to play. That's what he's trying to play. But there's always that sense that it could break apart at any moment and do something else. And
there's a sort of triangular relationship between you and the audience's kind of catalogue in their head. And
at the best. Although it's interesting, the point that you're making, because let's say the audience doesn't know it, then it's a different type of thing. You might feel that you're not communicating or connecting in quite the same way. But even then, it should make sense as a musical thing. Even if somebody said, I didn't really hear the Mozart in that because I don't know that piece. Okay, but maybe, hopefully, it still made some type of musical sense.
Have you performed to audiences who don't have that knowledge, who don't have the cultural knowledge behind?
Absolutely.
And how did they respond differently?
Well, sometimes they just sort of sit there, they're stunned. I mean, I once played at a beer festival in China, and we did a version of the Goldberg Variations. And it was pretty clear that they weren't really connecting what was happening to a piece by Bach. But in a way, that's what I'm saying, that if you still go for it musically, they enjoyed it. I'm just not sure that they understood or necessarily appreciated the connection that we're making with a pre-existing piece of music.
And often when you're taking something that exists already and then playing it in your own way, you can be satirizing it or making jokes, or there's a lot of elements like humor or disdain or
Right. I mean, people sometimes also read that into it because the music for many is so sacred that it's inviolable. You can't take a piece by Beethoven or Mozart and start putting your own improvisations. I totally understand that point of view and I respect it. I guess my own point of view is that there's so many versions of that. Beethoven is not in danger, Mozart is not in danger. I'm looking for it much more from the point of view of a jazz musician, which is that we're used to taking pre-existing forms as well as composing our own forms as sort of springboards for this type of improvisation. So, of course, many even songwriters thought the jazz musicians that are playing my song, they're not really playing it, they're just using it as a basis. And of course we say, yeah, but you get the royalty payment. We get the idea that we're using it as for our own purposes. And so in that sense, I think you have to sort of make the leap that you're not really going to hear the Goldberg Variations in its entirety played exactly. Instead, you're hearing something about theme and variations, which has Bach in it, but also has other music, other variations, either spontaneously improvised or composed, that are using the same chords that Bach used, but coming up with different things, maybe mirroring his technique. If he's writing canons, I try to improvise canons. If he has dances like the Gigue and the Sarabande, I can have mambos and tangos. If he has drinking songs, I can put my drinking songs. But I'm also improvising using those harmony in a lot of different styles, as he was, because he also, in a way, was writing a piece at the end of his life that was an encyclopedic summing up of all the influences that he loved, all the styles, all the different keyboard styles, different composers like Scarlatti or Handel that he was referring to. So, in a way, it's more about theme and variations. If the audience understands that, it's great. And if not, hopefully they enjoy it.
It's interesting that you've got a defense of it, as if, do some people feel threatened? And is that something that...
I mean, it's not so much a defense, it's really much more, I think, explaining the way that I'm...
Because it's not immediately...
in other words, that again, it's that thing. Because maybe you're right, though. Maybe it's because many people, naturally in the course of doing something like this, they're skeptical or they're not into it or they're very critical of it.
Would you say it's easier to do that in the US than in France, where perhaps there's more of an idea of culture being a museum that needs to be respected and
Actually,
adulated?
I find Europe to be more open-minded to it, maybe because the violations by an American might seem okay. A New Yorker doing it, it's more the stereotype of us as doing something like that. The United States is more conservative, though, because the classical audiences there are always very fearful. Not always. I mean, there's definitely places where we play in the United States where there's an interested public for new music, places like New York and San Francisco. But my experience is that I play much more in Europe doing these types of projects. First of all, because the people appreciate the original music more. And second of all, because there's many more opportunities, many more festivals, many more get-togethers with different types of musicians and artists here than in the United States. The United States obviously is a very active music scene, but a lot of it is very commercial and I would say conservative.
Right. And how does Lille fit into that?
Very well. I was invited here a couple months ago and played a version of Mahler's Sixth, which was a real adventure, and I really appreciate the support and the openness.
So how does it work when you're working on a piece, for example, listening to Mahler Sixth? Do you spend a few days with it, in your headphones and really, or how do the ideas come?
It depends, but with Mahler Sixth, I arranged every bar, which was a monumental task. It took me months. For my ensemble, which basically is a sextet. It's like a rhythm section and violin, clarinet and trumpet.
So you go through the score bar by bar?
Bar by bar, and arranged it and then analyzed it harmonically so that we could sort of read it like a chord chart. And, honestly, we could have used a lot more rehearsal and experience playing it, because that's what I find a lot in these projects, is that it starts out one way, but as we play it more and more and get more comfortable and things develop, then it sort of takes on its own life. But, I usually try to sit down and take the music apart and then write a type of arrangement for the group, especially if I'm working with my own group, that then gets broken up as we start to play. Or I might have an idea, this would be a good place for the trumpet solo, so boom, let's hook that up. Here's the chords for that. Here's the time frame. Other times it's more a question of a group improvisation that happens, and then we play pretty straight the music, and then something else happens. Sometimes the improvisations, let's say, have more of a connection, like with Mahler, with the folk music and the military music and the parade music that he was including, that we can actually accentuate that. But other times it's much more of like in the Gershwin piece, here's the form of Rhapsody in Blue going by, but while I'm playing, trumpet take a solo here, clarinet do this here. And it sort of takes on a life of its own as we develop it.
Do you have contact with the classical, with people who interpret for example, Mahler in a traditional way? Do you discuss how they interpret it, or do you really? Is there an exchange between those musicians and your?
I've had exchanges and gotten letters and been in contact, let's say, with conductors and. With Mahler especially, because there's so many fanatics, I didn't realize all the Mahler societies and the passionate listeners and very opinionated, informed. And so I've had to, let's say, go to Mahler societies and defend my music. And some people, I think, they'll say something like, you're really connecting it. Sometimes they harp on the Jewish aspect of connecting that, or the idea that Mahler, even though he wasn't an improviser, he changed a lot. He was always developing his interpretations. He put trombone parts.
He went into his house by the lake and.
Yeah, but even when there's a great tape that I forget his name now, but the guy that has put out a book of every photo of Mahler, but he also did a speaking interview with the people, old guys from the New York Philharmonic, who talked about what it was like to be under Mahler when he came to New York in 1908, 1909. Wow. And they were talking very, like he would say one day, I want this way, it has to be. And the next day, this has to be quicker. And they said, Maestro, you said yesterday slower. And he said, that was yesterday. Mm. But he was such a spontaneous man. When he was happy with their performance, he took them all out to eat afterwards and took the subway to Brooklyn. Just these types of images as somebody who lives in New York, and found out that Mahler lived on my street, on 72nd Street, at the corner. So I feel there's a sort of a connection. I read a lot about his biography and thought about how to present his music, and maybe still have other projects maybe in the future.
And when are we going to be seeing you back in France?
I hope soon. I'm not sure exactly, but I hope soon. Great. I always enjoy playing here.
Great. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.